We'll now see the force field. So select the plane, go to emitter and add the emitters here so that I can show you what a force field can do. Again, we have a similar properties of the emitters. You can go through it. If you play the simulation, you will see that the emitters will fall down because of the gravity. Now let's add a force field. So force is the basic sort of force which is going to affect the emitter. So if I play the simulation for now, I'll show you all the settings are basics. Strength I'm increasing to 15 and force to 5. So as you can see, because of this force field, this emitter having some effect. For starters, you can play with the strength and flow of the force field and the location of the force field to have different sort of effect. So that's the one thing, and you can change the emitter to different sort of objects. So it doesn't need to be circular, you can change this to other objects, and we'll see this soon in the upcoming tutorials. So next force field is wind. Go to add force field and go to wind. So wind is also very similar to the force one, but we can manipulate the direction. So we can increase the size by scaling it, and we can rotate it, and by the name itself it is very clear, it will give the effect of wind. So if any particle is flowing under gravity, you can increase the strength and the flow from the force field properties, and you can see, so I increase the strength and the particles are flowing in a particular direction. You can use multiple wind sources to give a combined effect so that you can manipulate the direction of flow of the particles, and you can have different strength and flow properties for the different wind sources so that you can achieve the result that you are looking for. Next up is vortex. Vortex, as the name suggests, it will give you a tornado kind of effect, the vortex effect to your particles. So as you can see, the particles are moving in a circular direction, in a particular circular direction. Let me now, as you can see, you can change the strength of the vortex. You can also change the inflow. So inflow means the direction, so you can either go clockwise or you can also go anti-clockwise, and with the increase of the strength, you can see the particles are moving very rapidly and in an uncontrolled manner. And if you decrease the strength, it will have some controlled effect. So for starters, you can just play with the strength inflow, or you can use the combination of the force field that we are going to look. You can put strength to negative also to have a different sort of effect, and you can change with the shape as well, although shape won't matter. And you can also change the wind factor, but for the absolute beginners, you can just play with the strength and inflow. So once you get used to it, we can look into much more deeper settings, but for now just play with the strength and flow, use trial and error, see what works for you and for your projects. So but this is a good way to create a tornado sort of effect. Next up is magnetic. So as the name suggests, it will kind of attract the particles, and it can also repel the particles. So like the previous one, we have strength, we can definitely play with the strength, but it's a little tricky. So depending upon, as you can see, it is very scattered, so you have to, it will mostly depend upon the project and the result that you are trying to get. But magnetic field will basically just attract or repel the particles. You can change with the shape, as you can see, you can go with point or line, so it will have different sort of effect. You can use more than one magnetic particles, I mean the source, so it will have some sort of rippling and attraction effect. So this is very interesting one. This is called as curve guide. So as you can see, we'll get a curve. So one will be the starting point and other one will be the end point. You can generally move with the vertices, you can grab the vertices and you can move it, and once you're happy, you'll get a final curve like this. So now we can add some source material. So in this case, I'm just using a UV sphere. So source material as in particles will be emitting from that, and it will follow the curve guide that we have already drawn right now. So from this, we'll just select the UV sphere and we'll add the emitters. Now if you see, the emitters will follow this path. So let's change the speed of the emitter. So right now it's very fast, right? So if you want to slow it down, you go to the emitter properties right here and you change the lifetime to, let's say, 100. As you can see, the speed has decreased now. So if you increase the lifetime, the flow will be decreased of the emitter particles. Come back to the force field settings. Here if you change the free value to 0.3, so the particle will not be restrained there, so it will just flow like this. So now we will have a gravity sort of effect. If I turn this upside down, you can see basically it is kind of flowing. Now under setting, if you change the clumping amount to let's say 1, so you can see this sort of effect. So at the end, you'll basically all the particles will sort of converge. You can keep playing with the free amount and the shape amount of the clumping. So you'll have slow effect and it will just kind of dilute or disappear into the end point. There is one more option of clumping, so you can change the minimum distortion to 0.3 and you can see from the source field the particles will just emit in some direction, but it's like having one more junction. So if you change the value of maximum distortion, you can see that at the center we have one more curve guide junction. So depending upon the maximum distortion value, the particles will get attracted to the center location and will complete the journey. So it's like having a black hole in the center. So depending upon the strength, it will attract. Let's change the emitter object to Suzanne, the monkey head. Click here on the sphere and go to emitter setting. Let's decrease the number to 100. And if you come down in the velocity, check rotation. And if you come down here to render properties, you change the halo to object. So now we can choose object, and here in the drop down in instance object, choose Suzanne. So now we can change the scale from here itself and play. So as you can see, instead of particles we have Suzanne coming out of the sphere. Now we can change, increase and decrease the speed of this flow from here, from the lifetime, as you can see, and we can definitely increase and decrease the scale, and we can play with it. Now it is not limited to just Suzanne, we can just choose any object. You just, as you can see, it looks very cool the way it is coming. We can also rotate this Suzanne head or any object. Now there are a few more properties, the force field properties, but we will not look into that for beginners. The force field, magnetic field, vortex, wind, and this curve guide is more than enough. You can play with this, you can experiment around this 5 force fields, and we'll see the further fields in the advanced tutorial. Select the cube and give it a rigid body, and in the rigid body give it as an active object. Then select the plane, give the rigid body, but this time give it passive object. If you play the simulation, nothing dramatic is happening, so we'll select the object. Under the collision, if you go down here, under the collision in surface response, increase the bounciness. So now if you play, still nothing is happening because we have to give bounciness to the plane as well. So now we have given bounciness to both of them, and as you can see, there is bounciness in the simulation. Now if you rotate the cube and play, it will have a different effect. So it all depends upon how you are throwing the body. There are a few more properties, so we can also increase the mass of the object. So right now I'm giving this monkey 2 kg, and the shape of collision we can keep it as a mesh, and rest everything we are keeping it same. We are increasing the bounciness, and if you play, let's play, it's having this sort of effect. Now again, let's rotate the monkey and try to throw it. It will fall like this. Let's rotate it a little bit more and see what happens. So every time if you rotate it depends upon how the body are colliding. Here is a few more example of rigid body simulation. So it all depends upon at what height we are throwing the object and the weight of the object and other properties. Let's change the height of the ball this time and see what it will do. And as you can see, it all depends. So basically you can actually simulate depending upon all the physics laws. Let's change the weight of the body this time. I'm reducing the weight basically, and as you can see, we are having this sort of effect. We can add few more objects, and now it is all upon you and your creativity. So I have shown you how you can do a basic rigid body simulation. So just play with it, experiment with it. Let's learn softer body simulation now. So I have selected the cube and I am giving softer body this time. And if you come down, we'll uncheck the gall and we'll check the stiffness and self collision. So basically this is the most basic property that you can give. Now we are going to give a jelly sort of effect to our cube. So for that we need to subdivide the cube. As you can see in the modifier, we already have the soft body. We'll add a subdivision surface modifier to give it much more geometry. Let's give it a level 2 subdivision surface, and now we are ready. Let's play the simulation with spacebar, and as you can see, we are having this jelly sort of effect as if something is filled inside our cube. So this is a good basic description of soft body simulation. You can always rotate the cube and try to make it fall like we did in rigid body simulation. So feel free to experiment with this. Here is one more example. So I have used the same step and procedure with the UV sphere and cylinder. So this one will be the absolute basic cloth simulation tutorial. We'll subdivide the plane by, let's say, 70 times. Under physics property, let's give cloth property to this plane. And under this you can see there are so many options available. You can experiment with this, but the most important is self collision. Self collision is important so that both the bodies collide with each other. Now select monkey and give it a collision, and basically it is all set. Now if you play with spacebar, you can see it is going very slow, and frame by frame basically it is rendering. Once it's completed, you will see this is what we'll get. You can always subdivide the plane to a more higher number to have much more geometry and much more detail, but for absolute basic beginner tutorial this is good. We can live with this. Let's do another cloth simulation. We'll select this plane, we'll subdivide it, let's say this time 50 times. And now let's select the cube and give it a collision property. So collision property is very basic one, we don't have to change much. Let's select the plane and go to edit mode and just select one vertex. So this will our pin vertex where we can drive the entire cloth. In this green vertex group you can add, you can click on plus and you can assign. So now this is assigned. Now press Ctrl H to hook. So if you do that, this is hooked now. I think it didn't happen last time. Let's do it again. Ctrl H and hook to object. It is hooked now, which means we can just grab it from there and we can just move the cloth. Now under physics property, let's give it a cloth property now. And if you come down here, you can see shape, and under shape we have pin group. You select the group. Basically that group is the pin, that the vertex that we selected previously. Self collision should be checked, and now if you play the simulation, it will take some time. You can move our pin group. Basically we can move our cloth from that vertex, and it will take some time, but after the simulation is completed it will look something like this. So this is a very simple way to actually move cloth within the Blender and give some simulation. For more detail we can subdivide the plane to a larger value and we can play with more properties.